Hey everyone, it's your guy here, back with another topic that's been lighting up the financial world. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Some new numbers are floating around and they're stirring up some serious heat. A lot of people see them, do a double take, and honestly, they can't believe their eyes. I've been getting questions about this nonstop on my social feeds. And I figured it's time we actually sat down and unpacked what the hell is really going on here, because this isn't just some academic debate. This affects how we see ourselves, how we see China, and how we prepare for the future. So what's the deal according to a different way of measuring economic muscle? China's economy looks like it has already blown past the United States, and I'm not talking by a little, we're talking a massive gap that makes you question everything you thought you knew about who's number one in the world. Here's the breakdown. The International Monetary Fund, yeah, the IMF, that global institution that everyone loves to criticize but still quotes when it suits them, release some global economic projections. If you use purchasing power parity, or PPP for short, their data shows that by 2026, China's GDP is expected to hit $43.49 trillion. The US about $30.49 trillion. Do the math, that puts China roughly $13 trillion ahead. 13 trillion with a T. Let that sink in for a second. 13 trillion, that's not pocket change. That's not a rounding error, that's a chasm. A Grand Canyon-sized gap that completely flips the conventional narrative we've been fed for decades by mainstream media, by Wall Street, by everyone who told us America is untouchable. Now, if you're used to looking at nominal GDP, the standard exchange rate method that every mainstream media outlet and Wall Street analyst loves to throw around, this looks insane because by that yardstick, China's GDP in 2025 is around 19.6 trillion, while America is sitting at about 30.8 trillion. The US is still ahead by over 10 trillion. Same countries, same year, two completely different stories that seem to contradict each other. So what gives? Why does swapping the ruler flip the entire picture upside down? Let's tear this apart piece by piece, because this matters. It matters for your wallet, your job, your kids' future, and your country's long-term standing in the world. First, you have to understand the guts of the two methods. The one we see every day in the headlines, nominal GDP, is deceptively simple. You count everything a country produces in its own currency, then convert it all into US dollars at the market exchange rate. Sounds fair, right? Sounds objective, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. The problem is the exchange rate itself. It's volatile, it's manipulated, it's driven by speculation, hedge funds, and short-term sentiment, and worse, it doesn't reflect real economic strength. It reflects traders' sentiment and capital flows that have nothing to do with how many cars roll off a factory line or how many meals a family can afford. It's a financial abstraction, not a measure of productive power. Let me give you a concrete example that hits home. Say China cranks out 140 trillion yuan worth of goods and services in a year at an exchange rate of 7 to 1, that's $20 trillion. But if the rate wobbles to 6.9, suddenly that same output is worth more in dollar terms. Did the factories produce one extra engine? Did the farms harvest one extra grain of rice? Did the ports load one extra ship? Nothing changed except the currency market's mood, a bunch of traders in London or New York pressing buttons on a computer, reacting to rumors, interest rate expectations, or even tweets. It's like using a stretchy ruler to measure your height. One day you're 6 feet, the next you're 5'10" without losing an inch of bone. That's insane, and yet we treat this as gospel in every news report and every economics textbook. And then there's inflation, which hits Americans right in the gut every time we go grocery shopping, fill up our tanks, or pay our rent. The US has been dealing with persistent price hikes for years now. When prices go up, nominal GDP balloons. Even if not a single additional loaf of bread comes out of the oven, not one more car rolls off the line, not one extra chip is etched in Silicon Valley, not one more house is built. That's price-driven growth, not production-driven growth. It's fake growth, phantom wealth that disappears the moment you try to spend it, because your dollar buys less and less. So nominal GDP can seriously overstate real economic juice. And that's exactly what's been happening in America while our manufacturing base continues to hollow out. That's where PPP steps in, and thank God for it because it cuts through the BS and tells you what actually matters. Purchasing power parity asks one blunt, no nonsense question: what can the same amount of money actually buy in different countries? That's what matters. That's what affects your life. Not some abstract exchange rate that moves with the wind, but what you can put on your table, what you can do for your kids. what you can get for your hard-earned dollars when you actually go out and spend them, here's the classic illustration that every economist uses, and I love it because it's so damn simple and relatable. In China, a similar burger at McDonald's, the Big Mac might cost 23 yuan. In the US, that same Big Mac goes for about $5. So under PPP, you divide 23 by 5 and get 4.6, meaning in terms of real buying power, $1 is roughly worth 4.6 yuan, not the market rate of about 7 yuan. See the disconnect. Market exchange rates and real purchasing power are often worlds apart. The yuan, under the market system, doesn't fully capture what it can actually do in your pocket. It's undervalued in the exchange rate, which means if you only look at nominal GDP, you're systematically undercounting what China's economy can actually produce, consume, and deliver to its people. This really hits home in services. And as Americans, we feel this pain every single day of our lives. Take healthcare. In China, a routine doctor visit might cost a few hundred yuan, maybe $50 American in the US. You're often looking at thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands, just for a basic checkup, and God forbid you need anything serious like an MRI or surgery. Legal services, same story, America runs on case law. So you need lawyers for everything, and they cost a fortune, hundreds of dollars an hour just to read a document or make a phone call. In China, ordinary civil disputes cost way less, and the legal system is far more accessible to average people. Medical, legal, education, transport, housing. These directly affect your buying power every single month when you pay your bills. Exchange rates just don't capture that. And that's a massive blind spot in how we measure economic strength. So PP constructs a standard basket of goods and services, food, housing, healthcare, education, appliances, transportation, you name it, it compares prices across countries and derives an implicit exchange rate based on actual buying power. It's like swapping that stretchy ruler for a solid steel one that doesn't bend or wobble no matter what the currency traders are doing. And when you use that steel ruler, the rankings often flip dramatically. And that's exactly what we're seeing with China and the US. Think about it this way. In the US, a cup of coffee at a Starbucks can set you back $5. Easy, sometimes 6 or 7 with tax and tip. In China, you can get a decent cup for a few yen, maybe $1.50, and often it's delivered to your door for free. Building a warship here, sky-high costs, labor, materials, compliance, union rules, everything adds up to billions per SHIP. In a manufacturing-heavy environment with tight cost controls and efficient supply chains. The same vessel can be built for a fraction of the cost. So a dollar buys vastly different amounts of real resources depending on where you are. That's why PPP is often more useful for measuring actual production capacity. And that's why the IMF data is so damn interesting and deserves our attention. Now, this isn't new. The theory dates back to the early 20th century, when Swedish economist Gustav Cassel argued that exchange rates should reflect changes in purchasing power over the long haul. Later, in 1986, the economist introduced the famous Big Mac Index. Because that burger is standardized globally, you can go to any McDonald's in the world and get the same product with the same ingredients. Compare its price, and you can see if a currency is over or undervalued relative to what it should be. It's a fun little tool, but it's actually serious stuff that economists take quite seriously. The World Bank's International Comparison Program expanded this to cover over 170 economies with hundreds of categories, not just consumer goods, but also public services like education, infrastructure, and government services. That's a massive data set covering most of humanity. China has long participated in this program and shares its data openly. And the data consistently shows that the yuan's PPP exchange rate is well below its market rate, meaning the yuan is undervalued in currency markets relative to what it can actually buy inside China. That means if you only use the exchange rate, you're systematically underestimating China's economic size, and by a lot. By PPP, China had already reached about 90% of US PPP GDP back in 2011. Let that sink in. That was 15 years ago, back when Obama was president, and we were still recovering from the financial crisis. Then in 2014, China officially surpassed the US to become the world's largest economy by this measure. In 2017, it broke 20 trillion international dollars. In 2022, 30 trillion, and by 2025, it had crossed 40 trillion international dollars. This isn't number juggling or statistical trickery. It reflects real mobilization of resources, industrial output, and consumer buying power that you can see and feel if you actually go there. So what underpins China's 43.49 trillion PPP GDP? Simple, not financial bubbles, not paper valuations, not crypto speculation, not real estate tricks, but sheer, tangible production capacity. And that's critical. A country's strength ultimately depends on what it can produce and what resources it can marshal when it needs to. China's industrial structure is massive and comprehensive. Unlike anything we have in America today, manufacturing value added accounts for nearly 30% of its GDP, far higher than the US. Where it's down to about 10 or 11%, a historic low still, China produces over half the world's share, more than the rest of the world combined. Shipbuilding, global leader by tonnage, producing more ships than the next several countries put together. Automobiles, over 30 million a year, dwarfing most developed nations, including US. And they're now exporting millions of them globally. And in new energy, batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, supply chains, complete electric vehicles, China is absolutely dominant, controlling vast swaths of the global supply chain and setting prices for the whole world. These are real. Physical outputs, you can touch them, drive them, sail them, build with them, power your home with them. That's why PPP better reflects China's real might, because it captures this productive heft that nominal GDP completely misses when it just looks at exchange rates. Now, don't get me wrong, the US economy is still incredibly powerful. In high-tech, finance, aerospace, semiconductor design, biotech, pharmaceuticals, entertainment, top tier, no question. We have incredible companies, incredible innovation, incredible talent, and incredible universities that attract the best minds from around the world. But the US structure is heavily skewed toward finance and services, paper wealth, stock buybacks, asset management, consulting, but a shrinking manufacturing base that's been offshored for decades. What happens when supply chains get disrupted? We've seen it in recent years with COVID, with the shipping crisis, with chip shortages, with port backups, critical industrial components, and basic manufacturing remain heavily dependent on Asia, especially China. For everything from rare earths to pharmaceuticals to electronics components, financial capital can inflate paper wealth fast, but it can't instantly replace factory floors. It can't bring back lost skills. It can't rebuild supply chains overnight. And it can't make America self-sufficient when push comes to shove. And if you look at everyday life, the difference is stark and uncomfortable for many Americans to admit. In the US, housing, healthcare, and education costs keep climbing relentlessly, far outpacing wage growth. Many families have decent nominal incomes on paper, but after mortgages, insurance, medical bills, property taxes, student loans, and childcare, disposable income isn't that comfortable at all. Plenty of folks need 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat. Living paycheck to paycheck in a country that's supposedly the richest on earth. Eating out a basic meal for a family of 4 at a mid-range restaurant can easily cost $100, sometimes more with tax and tip. In China, the same meal might be a fraction of that, maybe 20 or $30, and the quality is often just as good. That's purchasing power disparity in action, not a theory. $100 simply goes further in China, and that's not an opinion, that's arithmetic based on thousands of price comparisons. Tourists feel it immediately. Affordable convenience, efficient public transport that actually works, cheap food delivery, mobile payments everywhere, smooth infrastructure that's new and well maintained. The same income translates into higher daily living convenience, which is something we used to take for granted here, but are losing fast as our infrastructure crumbles and costs spiral. Of course, that doesn't mean China has no problems. It has plenty, and I'm not here to whitewash anything or pretend it's some kind of utopia. It's in the middle of a tough industrial upgrade and structural transition right now. Traditional sectors are seeing profit squeezes, old business models are being flushed out. And there's a lot of pain in the adjustment as they move from low-end manufacturing to high-value industries. Real estate is adjusting after a massive bubble that's still working its way through the system. Consumer sentiment is cautious because people are worried about the future. Competition is brutal in many sectors with companies fighting for market share, and the demographic clock is ticking with an aging population that will strain their social systems. People are spending more carefully, fewer big trips abroad, fewer restaurant splurges, more rational consumption and saving rather than splurging. That tells you households are more cautious about the future, and they're not wrong to be, just like Americans are cautious about their own futures. But at the same time, New growth engines are forming right before our eyes. Artificial intelligence that's advancing faster than many expected, high-end manufacturing that's moving up the value chain. New energy that's becoming the global standard, industrial robots that are automating factories at scale, digital economy that's integrating everything, low altitude economy, drones, and aviation services that are opening up new industries. All of these are taking off with government support and private investment. These are high-tech, high-value, high-potential fields that will define the 21st century economy, not the 20th century one. And China has a rare combination that no other country has, a complete industrial chain that covers almost everything, a massive internal market of over 1 billion people with rising incomes, and a deep pool of engineering talent that graduates in numbers we simply can't match in America. Whoever masters digital and smart transformation first will seize the next wave of global economic leadership. China has strong potential there, and we'd be fools to ignore it or dismiss it as luck or cheating. Meanwhile, the US faces its own structural pressures that are only getting worse, ballooning fiscal deficits that are completely out of control and show no sign of slowing down. Soaring national debt that's now over $34 trillion and climbing. Rising interest costs that are eating up a larger and larger share of the federal budget. Huge healthcare spending that delivers mediocre outcomes compared to other developed countries. Widening inequality that's tearing the social fabric apart with every passing year. And a squeezed middle class that feels like it's being left behind by both political parties. All of this erodes economic resilience. And no amount of stock market cheerleading or GDP headline grabbing can change that reality for the millions of Americans who are struggling to make ends meet. So we can no longer judge global competition just by GDP totals. That's lazy, it's misleading, and it's dangerous for our national security and our future prosperity. What really counts is comprehensive national capability, industrial chain, completeness, technological innovation, resource mobilization, supply chain security, and people's living standards. The IMF data is a wake-up call. We can no longer idolize nominal GDP as the be-all and end-all of economic measurement. Real economic power isn't about financial valuations, stock market caps, or exchange rates that move on a trader's whim. It's about three things fundamentally. How many critical products can you make yourself? How many real resources can you command when you need them? And can your people share in the prosperity? Or does it all go to the top 1% while everyone else treads water? China has not gone down a pure finance-driven path like we have. It has kept manufacturing front and center, from high-speed rail that crisscrosses the country and moves millions every day, to new energy production that's now the global standard in exports to the world, from large commercial aircraft that are finally taking to the skies to advanced equipment that competes with the best in the world, from chips that they're finally starting to make themselves in significant quantities to AI that's advancing faster than anyone expected just a few years ago. Many so-called bottleneck areas where they were previously dependent on foreign technology and couldn't produce themselves, are being broken through one by one, sometimes faster than analysts predicted. These breakthroughs may not show up immediately in nominal GDP because exchange rates don't capture them, but they will determine future competitiveness for decades to come. That's what really matters, not what some quarterly report says about the exchange rate. In the end, great power competition isn't about prettier accounting. It's about who has more industrial resilience, who can innovate faster and scale those innovations, who can protect their supply chains from disruption, and who can give ordinary people more stable and secure lives. Economic development isn't for making fancy spreadsheets or cheering for stock indices on CNBC. It's for improving people's lives, stable jobs that pay a living wage, reliable income that keeps up with inflation, affordable housing, that doesn't consume half your paycheck, decent healthcare, that doesn't bankrupt you, good education for kids that prepares them for the future, and dignity in old age without having to work until you drop. That's the whole point. And we seem to have forgotten that in America, while we chased financial fantasies and short-term profits at the expense of long-term strength. So when we look at the economy, we have to look at both surface numbers and underlying structure, both total size and quality, both what's happening on paper and what's happening on the ground. GDP numbers are static snapshots at a moment in time. Economic strength is dynamic and ever-changing, reflecting decisions made years ago and investments made today. Numbers can be manipulated by formulas and exchange rates, but real-life experience doesn't lie. When you can't afford a doctor, when your rent eats up half your paycheck, when your kids can't afford college without a lifetime of debt, when you can't find a good paying job in your community, that's the real economy. And that's exactly what PPP tries to capture in a way that nominal GDP never can. That's the key lesson from PPP for all of us. It tells us you can't judge an economy by its exchange rate converted paper size alone. You have to look at purchasing power, manufacturing capability, industrial base, technological independence, and how people actually feel at the end of the day when they count their money and pay their bills. China's PPP GDP leading the US by $13 trillion doesn't mean we can be complacent or arrogant. It doesn't mean they've won and we've lost. Not by a long shot. It does mean China has enormous real production and resource mobilization capacity that we overlook at our own peril. That's a powerful asset, a card they hold that we need to respect and take seriously, but that asset has to translate into tangible gains for everyday people, higher incomes, better lives, stronger social safety nets, cleaner environment, better public services. Only then does growth complete the circle and justify itself. If it just stays on a spreadsheet or gets lost in financial engineering, it's meaningless for the vast majority of people. So I always say numbers are dead, life is alive. The ultimate measure of economic strength is how well people are living. And that's where both China and America have enormous work to do. For us Americans, this should be a moment of reflection, not panic, not defeatism, but a hard, honest look in the mirror. What are we making? What are we building? What are we investing in? What are we leaving for our kids? Because if all we have are financial engineering, paper wealth, and stock buybacks, while the other side builds factories, ports, supply chains, and technological capacity, we know exactly how that story ends. It doesn't end well for the country that forgot how to make things. All right, that's it for today. I know that was a long one, but this stuff matters, and I wanted to make sure we covered every angle. I'll catch you in the next one. Stay sharp, stay informed, do your own research, and don't let anyone tell you that numbers don't matter. They do, but only if you know what they really mean and how they're cooked. Peace.